Some countries are blessed with natural resources, others with geographic protection. These facets of a country's location help it to survive and thrive through tumultuous times in history. For countries without such advantages, political connections can also be of help. However, Brandenburg, a country which eventually became Prussia and later unified all of Germany, could not rely on any of the aforementioned advantages. Rather, Brandenburg, as a nation, had to rely on the cleverness of its leaders and the tenacity of its people, all of which came into being due to the efforts of a single epochal ruler. Today, I shall discuss how Prussia's seemingly unfounded geopolitical success was a barrier broken by the oft-overlooked Frederick William, also known as the Great Elector of Brandenburg. Despite its name, the heart of the Kingdom of Prussia has always been centered in the region of Brandenburg. Since the 10th century AD, this land had been inhabited by Germans, and in the 15th century, the Hohenzollern dynasty came into power, giving them the right to elect the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, which is why Brandenburger princes were always called electors. To most outsiders, Brandenburg was an unattractive country. Early topographer Nikolaus Leuthinger described the region as being made up of sand, bogs, and for the most part swamp. These features of Brandenburg's geography made it extremely difficult to farm, causing Brandenburg to become an economic backwater compared to neighboring regions like Silesia. Brandenburg also had a problem with its neighbors, with the Swedes to the north, the Poles and Russians to the east, and the French and Austrians to the southwest. Brandenburg had to contend with the constant threat of invasion. To make matters worse, the little region was also located on the northern European plain, giving the small country few geographical advantages. One symptom of Brandenburg's weak location was that it was often subject to the geopolitical whims of other countries. Case in point being the 30 Years' War, which lasted from 1618 to 1648. In vague terms, the war was fought between Calvinist and Catholic states over which religion should be allowed in the Holy Roman Empire. Over time, however, the conflict grew to encompass more general, and at times more cynical, political aims. Much of Germany was caught in the crossfire of this deadly war, and Brandenburg was not an exception. Under the rule of George William, Frederick William's father, Brandenburg led a pendulum policy, or Schaukelpolitik, switching sides based on what would benefit the country more. Although these maneuvers allowed the country to remain somewhat independent, it also caused Brandenburg to be overrun by numerous hostile armies that would loot and pillage the little region for all it's worth. One Brandenburg inhabitant wrote at the time that a marauding Austrian army in Brandenburg pitifully tortured the people for money, and often burned people alive to the point that their skin even came off like that of a slaughtered goose. Though exceptionally gruesome, these descriptions of the treatment of the people in Brandenburg were not uncommon. By 1640, over half of Brandenburg's population had died, and some towns were left utterly depopulated. A nation in such disarray needed a great leader. For Brandenburg, this leader came in the form of Frederick William, or Friedrich Wilhelm in German, who would later earn the title of the Great Elector of Brandenburg. Though born in Berlin, Frederick William was sent to the Netherlands in 1634 to escape the dangers of war. There, he would study at the University of Leiden and learn from Dutch military practices to prepare for the throne. In 1640, Frederick William finally ascended to this position, and his first order of business was to help Brandenburg survive and recover from the 30 Years' War. This entailed the repulsion of remaining Swedish troops from Brandenburg, a task which would take over 3 years. After that, there remained the primary issue of rebuilding the Brandenburger army. Frederick William recognized that for Brandenburg, a powerful army was necessary to keep the country secure. Simultaneously, he also recognized that Brandenburg's population could not support a massive army of the likes of Russia or France. Instead, Frederick William decided to focus on army quality. Soldiers were outfitted with the newest technology, given the harshest discipline, and ensured a pension to prevent them from deserting. All of these efforts were intended to make the Brandenburger army, with only 30,000 men, efficient enough to fend off an army in the hundreds of thousands. In order to support such an army effort, however, the Great Elector needed to collect funds. For this, He created the General War Commissariat to collect taxes and organize the army. Here, Frederick William ran into some problems. Like much of Europe, Brandenburg hitherto had a semi-feudal system in which regional elites would oversee taxation and the construction of an army. With the creation of the General War Commissariat and the promotion of non-elites into the Brandenburger government, the Junkers, who were Brandenburg's landed elite, became quite bellicose towards Frederick William, forcing the elector to station troops in various cities to coerce the nobility into paying their contributions to the central government. Though the Junkers put up a powerful resistance, their weakened state following the 30 Years' War, combined with the Great Elector's insistence on centralization, eventually caused them to relinquish their long-held privileges, albeit in return for the ability to hold high-ranking positions in the military. These actions put Brandenburg on a path towards absolute monarchy. Along with new taxes, another one of the Great Elector's reforms, which vexed many Brandenburgers, was the elector's religious policies. As Brandenburg's first Calvinist leader, Frederick William had a lot of work to do to make Calvinism accepted in a mostly Lutheran country. A major part of this was how the Great Elector imported Calvinists from other principalities to work in his government. Making up 2/3 of the government office holders, these transplanted Calvinists not only did their jobs efficiently, but also promoted religious tolerance between the three major sects in Brandenburg. All of these reforms, combined with the collective trauma of the 30 Years' War, helped to transform Brandenburg into a militaristic country. Every citizen, from the highest lord down to the lowest peasant, was deeply invested in the nation's wars and politics. It is for this reason that many like to refer to the Prussians as the Spartans of Germany, or as Voltaire put it, an army with a state. Stoicism, collectivism, and militarism were all utterly omnipresent in Brandenburger and later Prussian society. Of course, an army without a strategy is worthless, so the Great Elector became a master of diplomacy and geopolitics. Immediately after the end of the 30 Years' War, the Great Elector took the pendulum strategy of his father and adapted it to current conflicts such as the Northern War of 1655 through 1660. In this war, the Great Elector started off fighting alongside the Swedes, but soon after switched to the Austrian and Polish side. These diplomatic oscillations characterized the Great Elector's reign, with him defending Vienna from the Ottomans in one moment, and working with the French to undermine them in another, and then after that, signing a treaty with the Dutch to undermine the very same French he had worked with. The most amazing thing about this diplomatic strategy, however, was that, for the most part, it worked. The Great Elector was given immense subsidies from all the major powers in Europe in the hopes of winning Brandenburg over. These diplomatic maneuverings also allowed the Great Elector to rapidly expand his territory, going so far as to establish a colony in Africa, while also keeping his core holdings safe. In addition, Brandenburg was given international recognition and prestige. This was especially true after the epochal Battle of Fehrbellin, in which the Great Elector bravely led his troops into battle and crushed the enemy Swedes, showing the true self-determination of Brandenburg. By the end of the Great Elector's rule, Brandenburg had been utterly transformed from a nation in disarray to an up-and-coming power. Saxony, Bavaria, and many other states in the Holy Roman Empire left the 30 Years' War in a similar, if not better situation than Brandenburg. However, unlike Brandenburg, which would formally become the Kingdom of Prussia and dominate the next 2 centuries of European history, no other German state would ever succeed in being anything more than a regional power. For most nations indeed, the issues of a small population, a lack of alliances, and bad geography are a death sentence, dooming them to conquest, subjugation, or irrelevancy. However, the Great Elector's rule proved to be a turning point for Brandenburg. Frederick the Great, Prussia's most revered king, attributed the beginning of Brandenburg's ascendance to the actions of Frederick William, his great-grandfather. For without the Great Elector's religious and political reforms, and the precedents of militarism and pragmatic foreign policy, Brandenburg and later Prussia would never have been at the epicenter of the 7 Years' War, nor a major rival for Napoleon, and nor would Prussia have ever been able to step forward and unify all of Germany. Instead, Brandenburg may have ended up annexed like the German states bordering France, or diplomatically subjugated like how Bavaria was to the Austrian Empire. In other words, were it not for Frederick William, the Great Elector of Brandenburg, and his epochal reign, Brandenburg could have never broken the barriers that stood in the way of its grand destiny, instead being remembered in the history books as merely a land of sand and mud.